I nearly read the wrong one then. To the angel, this is chapter 3 and verse 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut. And what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are a synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And may the Lord add much blessing to the reading of his word. Now, in a minute, the adults are going to get into that, but before
Great. Okay, so as we come to this section of the Bible, the question that's been on my heart and my mind is, what do you say to Christians, to churches that are battered and bruised, weak and wondering if they can carry on? Faithful people who have endured patiently great trials, but are hurting, counting the cost, and just waiting in dread for the next attack and difficulty, not sure that they'll be able to cope, that will just drive them over the edge. People who feel alone and unseen, really small and insignificant, excluded and rejected by those around with little strength or status. And at times, all of us as churches, as Christians, can feel just like that. And this is how it was for the church in Philadelphia, that the letter we're going to look at in Revelation chapter 3 was written to, and we're going to think about that this morning. And as I say, I'm wondering, what do we say? How do we talk to churches, to Christians in that kind of situation? How can we bring them, perhaps you, meaningful help and encouragement? Thankfully, we've got a fantastic model here, a wonderful example of words intended to bring healing and hope from the very lips of Jesus himself. Of the 7 churches written to in Revelations 2 and 3, this is one of only 2 churches that Jesus doesn't criticize or have any complaints about. He writes to them to comfort and encourage them, wanting them to carry on just as they had been, to endure and to overcome all of the hardships and hostilities they are facing. And it shows us straight off that just because we may be suffering, perhaps being rejected and oppressed by those around us, feeling weak and irrelevant, it doesn't mean that we are necessarily doing anything wrong or that there is anything that particularly needs to change. What needs to happen is for us to keep on being loyal and close to Jesus, be hearing his word speaking to us, and in the strength and power of that, continue to keep going and to overcome no matter how hard or dark things get. So how is it that Jesus speaks? What does he say? What's his model and approach for encouraging the battered and the bruised, the weak and the flagging, the hurting and excluded? Well, firstly, I'd like us to see from this passage in Revelation chapter 3, in sentence 7, how he speaks of the relevance of Jesus for such people. And then secondly, we'll see in sentences 8 to 10 how he speaks of the promises of Jesus for such people. And then thirdly, in sentences 11 to 13, we'll see how he speaks of the rewards of Jesus for such people. So firstly then, let's look at the relevance of Jesus for these people. In the same way as Jesus does in each of these 7 letters, he begins in sentence 7 by describing himself. He gives a particular feature, an aspect of who he is that is especially relevant and needed by those that he's writing to. So he says here, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no man can shut, and what he shuts, no man can open. And these descriptions, they tend to be taken from the vision of Jesus that the writer John had as the book of Revelation opens in chapter 1. Where, as is the case throughout the book of Revelation, there's lots of unusual images and symbols that are used. But here, the imagery of Jesus kind of holding a key and opening a door, that actually is only very loosely connected to that vision, whereas most of the others, it's very exact. The images and symbols are just taken and used. But this image of Jesus holding the key of David, him opening a door that no one can shut and shutting a door that no one can open, it is actually taken from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 22 and sentence 22. If you want to look at that, that's on page 707 in the Church Bible. And there in Isaiah 22 and 22 it says of a guy called Eliakim, I will place on his shoulder the key of David. What he opens, no man can shut, and what he shuts, no man can open. So the same language. And now this guy, Eliakim, he was being appointed as the chief servant or the head steward over the king's household. And this was a really important and powerful position. With the key of David, whether that's a literal key or just a symbolic, figurative one, he was able to open all of the doors of the palace, and indeed the very throne room itself. And what that meant is that if you wanted to have access to the king, then you had to go through Eliakim. He controlled who could go in and who could see the king and who couldn't. If he opened the door to you, well, no one could shut it. You had free access to the king. Whereas if he shut the door to you, there was no one else you could go to get in. If he shut the door, no one could open it. You were barred. You could not have access to the king. Now, Jesus here is saying that he now is the chief servant, the head steward of the king's household. He holds the key of David, and he either opens up access for you into the very throne room of God, into the presence of God, or he shuts that door to you so that you're barred and blocked from ever having access to God. Of course, elsewhere in the Bible, Jesus famously uses very similar imagery, saying in John chapter 10 and verse 9, I am the gate, or I am the door. And so he's not just the person with the key, the person who unlocks the door. He himself literally is that person, that door we have to go through to access into the kingdom of God, and with that, into the very presence of God. And I mentioned that this imagery here in Revelation 3 is loosely taken from the vision of Jesus given to John in Revelation chapter 1. And there, Jesus is said to hold the key of death and Hades. So again, it's Jesus who can unlock death and the grave and give us access to the world and life beyond. Again, primarily to God himself. And perhaps you can begin to see why this is just the truth that Christians and churches need to hear about Jesus when they're battered and bruised and weak and flagging and hurting and excluded. How Jesus is and has the key of David. He is the one who can give us access to God and his throne room, and how that's just so relevant for such people. In particular here, the trouble and the opposition that the church in Philadelphia was experiencing came in part from the local synagogue and the Jews who worshipped there. Jesus refers to this in sentence 9 of this passage. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Now we'll look at that a bit more in a moment, but it's clear that these Jews who were part of that synagogue there in Philadelphia, they were at the forefront of stirring up the trouble that these Christians were experiencing. They were lying and slandering these people. Now, of course, many of the Christians there were probably of a Jewish background themselves, as Jesus, of course, was. And in the early days of the church, Christians had been viewed as being part of the Jewish religion. But that was no longer the case. And now the Jews, they were kicking Christians out. They were excommunicating them from the synagogue. Christians were thought of as traitors and troublemakers. They were deniers of the faith and weren't seen as part of the historic people of God any longer. And with that, the claim was that, well, they couldn't therefore have access to God and all the promises that he had made to the Old Testament people, the Jews. It was the Jewish faith, it was claimed, that held, as it were, the key of David and controlled the door that gave access to God. And so this small, weak group of Christians, opposed and excluded by the Jews and actually the rest of society as well in different ways, they had to know that it was Jesus and no one else who held the key of David, who gave them access to God and into his very throne room. That was why this image was chosen and is so particularly relevant for these people. Yeah, and this is how we need to talk to Christians and churches that are bruised and battered and weak and flagging and hurting and feeling excluded. Who is the Jesus particularly relevant to their struggle? What aspect of his character and work does that person or people most need to hear about? And given everyone's circumstances are unique, it's not always going to be the same. And that's why we're given hundreds of names and descriptions and metaphors for God in the Bible. He's the Good Shepherd, the tear collector, the Ancient of Days, the Lord of Hosts, to name just a few. And each one of those emphasizes something slightly different, a particular feature, an aspect of who Jesus is and how he can meet us in the situation we're in. And some are going to feel more relevant and precious than others, depending on what it is that we're facing and needing at the time. And so we have to, as it were, search the scriptures and find the name or description or metaphor for God that most resonates and connects with us in the situation that we're in, that we can speak and bring to others in their situations as well. That's what Jesus is modeling here when he chooses to begin this letter with this image of himself holding the key of David and being the one who opens or closes the door to God. But having done that, Jesus then brings wonderful and comforting promises to these battered and bruised people. So let's secondly think from sentences 8 to 10 about the promises of Jesus for such people. Jesus says, I know your deeds. And then he gives his first promise. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. Of course, that flows directly from the description of him that we've been thinking about. But the promise and the emphasis here is that Jesus has placed right before them, for them and their use, an open door with unrestricted access to God and his throne room. A door that no one can shut and bar them from. They're not the excluded outsiders. They're the welcomed insiders. Those who now have an exclusive VIP pass and backstage access to the King of the universe. He's given them this not because they were celebrities or superstars, but rather, he says, because I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. This open door to God, and God with his open door policy, as it were, where we can have access and come to him at any time for any reason. This is the secret. This is the reason how those with little strength, like these Christians, can yet keep God's word and be faithful and loyal to him. Because what promise does the weak and weary, the flagging, fragile, excluded, oppressed, what do we need to hear and hold on to? That Jesus gives us access to God. He's opened that door that will stay open and means that we can be coming time and time again at any time for any reason into the very presence of God. When we're feeling at our weakest, when we're feeling that we can't carry on, we can be going and turning and coming through that door to God. As Hebrews 4 and verse 16 tells us, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. But then Jesus gives a second promise in sentence 9. And this is what we read earlier about the Jews opposing and slandering these Christians. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. So for the slandered, excluded Christians, Jesus is promising vindication and an apology by and from the very people who so mistreated and hurt them. And I love what it is that these people will have to acknowledge. That these despised, dismissed Christians who are put out of the synagogue, who are unwelcome, they are the ones who God truly loves. And now, of course, these Jews, as the historic people of God, felt they were the ones that God had loved and chosen. But they had rejected Jesus. And so God had rejected them. Some from among the people of Israel, they had and continue to believe in Jesus. And those people, along with non-Jews, Gentiles like us who believe, we have now become the true Israel of God, the true inheritors of all God's promises and blessings that he originally made to the nation of Israel. Those who are ethnic Jews, those who claim still to be the favored people of God, will one day, on Judgment Day, along with everyone else who rejects Jesus, they will acknowledge that they were wrong and that Jesus was right. And that Christians are those who God has loved and favored. And we can cling to this promise of ultimate vindication and this precious reality that despite all appearances at times, Jesus assures us, I have loved you. Again, this is exactly what Christians and churches, battered and bruised, weak and flagging, excluded and opposed, exactly what we need to hear. It takes the pressure off us. We don't have to kind of vindicate ourselves and certainly not seek revenge or retribution for being badly treated. Jesus is going to vindicate us on the final day. And everyone will see and will finally acknowledge that we are those who are loved and favored of God. Not because of anything good about us, but simply because God has chosen and set his love on us. But there's one more promise here in sentence 10. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. Now, Christians have different opinions about what this hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world is, and how these particular Christians will be spared that. It does seem to be talking about something global rather than just localized and specific to these Christians in Philadelphia. And many believe that there will be a particularly intense and brutal wave of persecution on Christians before the world is brought to an end. And I think that is a possible interpretation of this verse, and some other passages would seem to lend support to that. However, other Christians, and I think this is what I would favour, they believe that this hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth is the final judgment itself. And that would fit with the previous thought and time when these Christians will be vindicated. And indeed, with the door having been opened by Jesus that gives us access to God, because that is the way that we are going to be spared and kept from this hour, from condemnation and from hell that awaits everyone else. Remember the link with Revelation 1, where Jesus is described as holding the key of death and Hades. And the comfort in hearing this promise for beleaguered and battered Christians is that whatever hardship and opposition we face now, however we're judged and condemned by synagogues or secular law courts or even the court of public opinion or the opinions of our friends and families, however harsh and crushing that is, we're going to be spared and vindicated in this final hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world. God doesn't, and he will not condemn us. Indeed, he approves when we keep his command to endure patiently whatever we face, knowing we are loved of God, doing that through the access that we have to God, and living in the strength and grace that we need in our time of need. These are the promises that Jesus speaks, and we can speak to those who are battered and bruised. And of course, these aren't the only promises. There are many great and precious promises that we can speak and use. And there's a third means here that Jesus does to encourage and help overcome those who are struggling. And that is to consider the rewards of Jesus for such people. That's what sentence 11 to 13 is all about. Jesus assures us, I am coming soon. He's come once, he will return. In the meantime, he urges and calls on us, hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. That crown being a picture of eternal life as those glorified and exalted and reigning with Christ. Jesus' whole purpose in writing these 7 letters is to instruct and help his people here and now to overcome and to triumph and to hold on and be victorious. And in sentence 12 he says, the one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Now, I don't know how you fancy being a pillar for all eternity. This strong column, often ornate, that stands tall and supports and is integral to the structure of the heavenly temple. Now, of course, this is only figurative. It's a picture. But for those who see themselves as weak and unimpressive and flagging and about to fall down, on that day, to be sturdy and upright, an essential feature at the heart of this heavenly temple. That surely is a great delight and surprise and encouragement. Our future is to be the mainstay, the linchpin, the key player right at the heart of the action. In fact, never again will you leave the temple, we're told. We'll no longer need the open door, as it were, to continually be coming into God's presence, because we'll be a permanent feature right there in God's presence. That's the reward that Jesus gives to those who overcome, who are victorious. And more than that, he promises, I will write on them the name of God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Writing, or perhaps even branding a name on someone, was to mark them out as belonging to that person. Now that might seem a little negative, with the association perhaps with cattle, or even worse, with slavery. And yet, of course, today we still wear branded clothes. Nike or Under Armour, or perhaps the Speak Baptist logo, that really fashionable hoodie that we have, some of us. Because we like being associated with that name. There is that sense of belonging and being identified with it. As Steve was saying to the kids, it's an honour to have God's name written on us, the name of the new Jerusalem. It's a permanent way of marking us as belonging to God and being citizens of this new heavenly world. These are the things that Jesus is speaking to battered and bruised people, weak, flagging people. He's telling them, as we can tell others, of the relevance of Jesus, the name, the description, the metaphor that is most suited and needed. He's telling them of the promises of Jesus. Again, the most relevant from among the many, many great and precious promises given in the Bible. And he's telling them of the rewards of Jesus, what lies before those who keep going, who overcome and are victorious. And I pray that we ourselves are going to be encouraged and comforted by this message, but also that we each would grow in our ability to speak in these ways to other Christians and other churches who are struggling and suffering, those who often are like ourselves with little strength, and yet needing and wanting to overcome and be victorious. How we badly need these encouragements, how we need cheering on and spurring on to keep going, how we need to be speaking the truth in love to one another in our lives and the situations we face. So may the Lord be helping us in this, perhaps even starting right now here, immediately after this service, with the people sitting next to us, or those who will have a cup of coffee with. But before that, though, let's sing again. Let's sing a song that reminds us